Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're diving into one of the most extraordinary encounters Padre Pio ever witnessed, something that reveals the invisible threads connecting our world to the next. If you've been following these stories, you already know that for Padre Pio, prayer wasn't just words whispered into silence. It was power unleashed across dimensions, grace moving through realms we can barely comprehend. But what happened on this particular evening in San Giovanni Rotondo changed everything he thought he knew about the speed of divine mercy. Picture this: a cold February night in 1952. The monastery was wrapped in that deep stillness that only comes in the hours before dawn. Padre Pio was in his cell, kneeling before a small wooden crucifix, lost in prayer as he had been for most of the night. His stigmata ached with that familiar burning sensation, a constant reminder of the suffering he carried for others. The flame of his oil lamp flickered gently, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. Then something shifted. The air grew heavy, almost electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Padre Pio lifted his head slowly, his heart quickening. He had felt this presence before, that unmistakable sensation of a soul drawing near from beyond the veil. But this time was different. This time, he could sense urgency, desperation, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Standing before him was the figure of a man, translucent yet unmistakably real. His clothes were those of a soldier, worn and tattered, bearing the marks of battle. His face carried the weight of unspeakable sorrow, eyes hollow with a grief that seemed to echo through eternity itself. But there was something else in those eyes. Hope, a flickering, fragile hope that hadn't been extinguished despite whatever darkness he had endured. The soldier spoke, his voice carrying the texture of distant wind. "Father, I have been waiting so long, trapped between worlds, unable to move forward, unable to go back." Padre Pio felt his chest tighten with compassion. He had encountered many souls from purgatory, but this one seemed different. There was an immediacy to his presence, as if he stood on the very edge of some great transition. "Tell me your burden, my son," Padre Pio whispered, his own voice barely audible in the sacred quiet of the cell. The soldier's form seemed to solidify slightly, as if the saint's attention itself provided some measure of comfort and strength. "I died in the war, Father, not in glory, not defending the innocent, but in anger, in hatred. I killed not to protect, but to destroy. My final moments were filled with rage, not repentance. I carried that poison with me into death, and it has kept me bound, unable to approach the light I can see in the distance." Padre Pio's heart broke for this tormented soul. He had seen countless spirits bearing the weight of their earthly choices, but this man's anguish seemed particularly acute. The saint could sense layers of suffering, not just from his own actions, but from the isolation, the endless waiting, the terrible clarity that comes after death when every choice is seen for what it truly was. "How long have you been in this state?" Padre Pio asked gently, though he suspected the answer would pierce his soul. 7 years, Father. 7 years of seeing my victims' faces, of understanding the ripples of pain my actions created. 7 years of wanting to ask forgiveness, but feeling too stained, too unworthy even for mercy." The soldier's voice cracked with the weight of accumulated sorrow, but then something extraordinary began to unfold. As they spoke, Padre Pio became aware of another presence in the room, not another soul from purgatory, but something happening simultaneously in the world of the living. He could sense, with that mystical awareness that often overwhelmed his human senses, a woman somewhere far away. She was elderly, her hands weathered from a lifetime of work, her heart heavy with grief. This woman was kneeling beside her bed in a small apartment in Milan. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks as she clutched a faded photograph. It was a picture of her son, taken before he left for the war, before he never came home, before the letters stopped coming, before hope slowly withered into acceptance of loss. "Sacred Heart of Jesus," the woman whispered through her tears. "I don't know where my boy is, but wherever he is, please have mercy on him. I know he wasn't perfect. I know the war changed him in his letters, but he was my son, and I love him still. Please, if he needs help, if he's suffering somewhere, let my prayer reach him." At that exact moment, Padre Pio watched in awe as a transformation began in the soldier before him. It started as the faintest glimmer of light around his form, like the first hint of dawn touching the horizon. The soldier's eyes widened in wonder and disbelief. "Father," he gasped, his voice now carrying notes of joy that seemed impossible given his previous despair. "Something is happening. I can feel warmth where there has been only cold. I can feel love where there has been only judgment. Someone is praying for me." Padre Pio nodded, tears streaming down his own face as he witnessed this miracle of divine connection. "Your mother," he said softly. "She has never stopped loving you. She has never stopped praying for you, and her prayer, offered with such pure maternal love, has just reached you across all barriers." The light around the soldier grew brighter, and his form began to change. The weight of anguish that had bent his shoulders seemed to lift. His eyes, which had been pools of despair, now shone with recognition and gratitude. "She remembers me not as the man I became in war, but as the son she raised. Her love sees past my failures to the soul beneath." Padre Pio watched in reverent silence as the soldier's transformation continued. This wasn't just forgiveness washing over him. This was love itself, pure and unconditional, breaking through every barrier that guilt and shame had constructed. The saint understood that he was witnessing something profound about the nature of prayer, about how love transcends time and space and death itself. "Father, I can see the path now," the soldier said, his voice now filled with wonder. "The light that seemed so distant, so unreachable, it's opening before me. But first, I must ask something of you." Padre Pio leaned forward, ready to grant whatever request this soul might make in his moment of liberation. The soldier's form was becoming more luminous, more ethereal, as if he was already beginning his journey toward the eternal. "Please, Father, if you ever have the opportunity, tell people that prayer for the dead is not just ritual, it's rescue. Tell them that love never dies, and that their prayers can reach us wherever we are. Tell them that no soul is ever truly lost as long as someone remembers them with love." The words hung in the air like a sacred promise, and Padre Pio knew he was receiving not just a request, but a revelation about one of the most mysterious and beautiful aspects of spiritual reality: the connection between the living and the dead, the power of intercessory prayer, the way love creates bridges across impossible distances. As the soldier began to fade from view, his face now radiant with peace, Padre Pio felt the profound weight of what he had witnessed. In a single moment, he had seen prayer transform suffering into joy, separation into reunion, despair into hope. But more than that, he had seen the speed at which divine mercy operates when authentic love opens the channels of grace. The light surrounding the soldier intensified until Padre Pio had to shield his eyes. When the brilliance faded, the cell was empty except for the lingering warmth of what had just occurred. But the experience was far from over. Padre Pio remained kneeling, his entire body trembling from the magnitude of what he had witnessed. He understood now that he had been granted a glimpse into the very mechanics of divine mercy, the hidden workings of grace that operate beyond human comprehension. What struck him most profoundly was the timing. The mother's prayer and the soldier's liberation had occurred simultaneously, not hours later, not days later, but in the exact same moment. This revealed something extraordinary about the nature of prayer for the dead. It doesn't travel through time and space like earthly communication. It moves through dimensions of love that exist outside human understanding of cause and effect. Padre Pio spent the remainder of that night in deep contemplation, trying to absorb the full meaning of what had transpired. By morning, his understanding of intercessory prayer had been fundamentally transformed. He realized that when we pray for the deceased, we're not just hoping our words might eventually reach them. We're participating in an immediate spiritual reality where love operates as a force more powerful than death itself. Word of this encounter spread quietly through the monastery, as most of Padre Pio's mystical experiences did. The friars who lived alongside him had learned to recognize the signs when he had received one of his extraordinary visions. They could see it in his eyes, in the way he moved through his daily prayers with even greater reverence than usual. Brother Alfonso, who had served with Padre Pio for many years, later recalled that the saint seemed to carry a new urgency about encouraging people to pray for their deceased loved ones. Within days, Padre Pio began sharing this revelation with the pilgrims who came seeking his spiritual guidance. He told them that their prayers for the dead were not gestures of hope, but actual instruments of liberation. He explained that every rosary offered, every mass celebrated, every moment of remembrance filled with love could be the precise key that unlocked a soul's journey to eternal peace. One particular conversation, documented by several witnesses, occurred when a grief-stricken father approached Padre Pio after losing his son in a factory accident. The man was consumed with guilt, believing his son had died without proper preparation for eternity. Padre Pio listened with infinite patience as the father poured out his anguish, his fears about his son's spiritual state, his desperate desire to help him somehow. "My son," Padre Pio said gently, placing his wounded hands on the man's shoulders, "do not carry this burden of uncertainty. Your love for your boy did not end with his death. Channel that love into prayer, into masses, into acts of charity offered in his memory. These are not empty gestures. They are spiritual forces that can reach him wherever he is." The father looked up with tear-filled eyes. "But Father, how can I know if my prayers actually help him? How can I be certain they reach him?" Padre Pio's response became one of his most quoted teachings about prayer for the dead. "You will know because love recognizes love. When you pray with authentic maternal or paternal love, when you offer sacrifice born from genuine affection, something responds in the spiritual realm. You may not see it, but the soul you're praying for feels it like warmth after cold, like light after darkness." He went on to explain that the soldier's mother in Milan had no idea her prayer had been answered so dramatically. She continued her simple routine of nightly prayers for her lost son, unaware that at the very moment she offered her heart to God on his behalf, he was being released from his spiritual prison. This, Padre Pio taught, is how divine mercy operates, quietly, efficiently, perfectly timed to the rhythm of love itself. The story of the soldier and his mother became a cornerstone of Padre Pio's teaching about the communion of saints, that mystical connection between the living and the dead. He helped people understand that death creates separation in the physical realm, but not in the spiritual dimension. Love continues to operate across that boundary, and prayer becomes the vehicle through which that love expresses itself most powerfully. Padre Pio also revealed that this experience taught him something profound about the nature of purgatory itself. It's not a place of punishment in the way many people imagine, but rather a state of purification, where souls become capable of receiving the full intensity of divine love. The soldier's 7 years of waiting weren't about paying a debt to divine justice. They were about becoming pure enough to accept the overwhelming reality of God's mercy without being destroyed by it. The prayers of the living, Padre Pio explained, don't change God's mind about a soul. Instead, they provide the spiritual energy needed for the purification process itself. Like adding fuel to a fire that burns away impurities, each prayer offered with sincere love accelerates the soul's journey toward readiness for eternal union with God. The mother's prayer didn't convince God to save her son. It provided the final measure of grace her son needed to complete his own transformation. This understanding revolutionized how Padre Pio approached his own intercessory work. He began offering specific prayers for souls who had no one left on earth to remember them. Soldiers without families, prisoners who died forgotten, people whose lives had been cut short before they could make peace with their past. He believed that his prayers could serve as substitutes for the family members these souls lacked, providing them with the love energy needed for their spiritual progress. The friars noticed that after this encounter, Padre Pio spent even more time in prayer for the dead than before. He would often be found in the early morning hours, long before the community prayers began, kneeling before the tabernacle with lists of names written on scraps of paper. These were souls who had appeared to him over the years, souls who had asked for his intercession, souls who had been recommended to his prayers by grieving families. What made his approach unique was the personal nature of his intercession. He didn't pray for the dead as a category of souls needing help. He prayed for individuals, speaking to each one by name, offering them the specific kind of love their hearts most needed to hear. For the soldier, it had been maternal forgiveness. For others, it might be friendship, understanding, or simply the assurance that they had not been forgotten. The ripple effects of this single encounter extended far beyond Padre Pio's own prayer life. As word spread among the faithful about what he had witnessed, devotion to praying for the dead experienced a remarkable revival. People began to understand that their nightly prayers for deceased relatives weren't just pious customs, but actual spiritual work that could make eternal differences in the lives of souls they continued to love. Families started organizing prayer chains for deceased members, understanding now that their collective love could create powerful currents of grace flowing toward the souls they sought to help. Churches reported increased attendance at masses offered for the dead, as people grasped that these weren't just memorial services, but active interventions in the ongoing spiritual lives of their departed loved ones, D1s. Perhaps most remarkably, Padre Pio began receiving visits from souls who had been freed through the prayers of people who had heard his story. These weren't just isolated incidents, but a steady stream of grateful spirits who appeared to him during his hours of prayer. Each one carried the same message. Someone on earth had remembered them with love, and that remembrance had become their salvation. One such soul was particularly memorable. She appeared to Padre Pio on a quiet Sunday evening, her face glowing with the kind of peace that only comes from finally finding rest after long suffering. She had been a young mother who died during childbirth. Leaving behind twin daughters, she feared would grow up without knowing how much she loved them. "Father," she said, her voice like music after silence, "my daughters prayed for me last night. They are grown women now, mothers themselves, and they lit candles for me on the anniversary of my death. But it wasn't just the candles. It was their words. They told me they forgave me for leaving them so young. They said they understood I didn't choose to go." Padre Pio listened as she described how that forgiveness had been the final key she needed. For decades, she had carried the weight of maternal guilt, believing she had abandoned her children when they needed her most. Her daughter's prayer of understanding and forgiveness had dissolved that last barrier between her soul and eternal peace. These encounters taught Padre Pio that the dead often carry burdens we never suspect. The soldier had carried guilt over his actions in war. The young mother had carried shame over what felt like abandonment. Others carried regret over words never spoken, forgiveness never offered, love never expressed. The prayers of the living could address these specific wounds with supernatural precision. He began teaching people to pray, not just for the general salvation of their deceased loved ones, but for healing of the particular wounds those souls might be carrying. A widow might pray that her husband be freed from any guilt he carried about not being a better provider. A child might pray that a deceased parent be released from regret over harsh words spoken in anger. These targeted prayers, offered with intimate knowledge of the soul's earthly struggles, seemed to carry special power. Padre Pio also discovered that the dead themselves often guided the prayers of the living in subtle ways. A woman might find herself suddenly thinking of her deceased brother and feel prompted to offer a mass for him, not knowing that at that precise moment he was in desperate need of spiritual assistance. A man might wake from dreams of his departed father with an inexplicable urge to pray the rosary for his soul, unaware that his father's spirit had somehow reached across the veil to ask for help. The saint began encouraging people to pay attention to these spiritual promptings, these sudden memories of the dead that seemed to arise from nowhere. He taught that these were often actual communications from souls who needed assistance, but could only reach their loved ones through the mysterious channels of grace that connect all hearts bound by love. One of the most powerful examples occurred with a woman named Maria, who had lost her son in a motorcycle accident. Months after his death, she began experiencing vivid dreams where her son appeared to her, not speaking, but simply standing in what seemed like twilight, reaching toward a distant light he couldn't quite touch. The dreams came night after night, always the same image, always with that sense of longing and incompleteness. When Maria visited Padre Pio and described these dreams, he immediately understood their significance. "Your son is showing you his condition," he explained. "He can see the light of heaven, but something prevents him from reaching it. He's asking for your help through these dreams. Padre Pio guided Maria in offering specific prayers for her son's release, not just general prayers for his soul, but focused intercession for whatever barrier might be preventing his final journey home. Within weeks, the dreams changed. Instead of reaching toward unreachable light, Maria saw her son surrounded by radiance, his face peaceful, his posture relaxed. The final dream showed him turning toward her with a smile of pure gratitude before walking confidently into brilliance that no longer hurt to look upon. These experiences revealed to Padre Pio that the relationship between the living and the dead is far more dynamic than most people realize. Death doesn't sever the bonds of love. Instead, it transforms them into spiritual channels through which grace can flow in both directions. The living can send assistance to the dead through prayer and sacrifice. The dead can send guidance and comfort to the living through dreams, signs, and subtle spiritual communications. This understanding led Padre Pio to develop what he called a ministry of remembrance. He encouraged families to create regular practices of prayer for their deceased members, not as burdensome obligations, but as ongoing expressions of love that transcends death. He suggested that families gather monthly to pray together for all their departed loved ones, sharing memories and offering specific prayers for any spiritual needs those souls might have. The results were often miraculous. Families reported experiencing profound peace about their deceased relatives, sudden certainty that their loved ones had found rest, and sometimes even direct spiritual communications expressing gratitude for the prayers offered. Children who had lost parents spoke of feeling their presence during family prayer times. Spouses who had lost partners described sensing their approval and continued love during these dedicated moments of intercession. Padre Pio also taught that prayer for the dead benefits the living in unexpected ways. When we maintain spiritual connection with our deceased loved ones through prayer, we remain connected to their wisdom, their love, and their continued care for us. He believed that souls in heaven become powerful intercessors for their families on earth, and that our prayers for them, while they journey through purgatory, create spiritual bonds that last for eternity. The soldier who had appeared to him that February night became a symbol for Padre Pio of how quickly divine mercy can move when authentic love opens the necessary channels. He often told people that no soul is ever beyond the reach of prayer, no death ever beyond the power of love to heal and redeem. The mother in Milan never knew that her simple, heartfelt prayer had accomplished something magnificent, but her ignorance didn't diminish the reality of what occurred. This truth became central to Padre Pio's spiritual direction. He taught people that every prayer offered for the dead matters, regardless of how small or imperfect it might seem. A brief moment of remembrance, a candle lit with love, a mass offered with sincere intention, even a simple, "God, please help them," whispered from the heart can become the instrument of a soul's liberation. The mystery deepened when Padre Pio realized that prayers for the dead don't just help individual souls. They strengthen the entire communion of saints, that mystical network of spiritual connection that binds together all who have ever lived. Every soul freed through prayer becomes a more powerful intercessor for others. Every act of love that crosses the boundary between life and death adds to the total amount of grace available for all souls who need assistance. This created what Padre Pio described as a circulation of mercy, where love given freely multiplies and returns in unexpected ways. The mother who prayed for her soldier son didn't just help him. Her prayer became part of the spiritual treasury from which other souls could draw strength. The soldier, once freed, became an advocate for other souls trapped in similar circumstances. The cycle of grace expanded with each act of loving remembrance. Runts. Years later, Padre Pio would describe this encounter as one of the most profound lessons he ever received about the nature of divine timing. The soldier's liberation hadn't happened because 7 years of suffering had somehow earned his freedom. It occurred because at the precise moment when divine providence ordained his release, a mother's love provided the spiritual key that unlocked his prison. This revelation transformed how Padre Pio understood the relationship between time and eternity. In our earthly experience, we think of prayer as something that might eventually reach its intended recipient. But what he witnessed that night proved that prayer operates in dimensions where past, present, and future converge. The mother's prayer didn't travel to her son. It became present with him instantly, as if love itself exists outside the constraints that govern physical reality. The implications were staggering. If prayer could move with such immediacy across the boundary between life and death, then every moment of intercession for the departed carried infinite potential. A grandmother praying for her deceased husband might be offering the exact grace needed for his final purification. A child remembering a lost parent with love might be providing the spiritual energy required for that soul's ultimate healing. Padre Pio began to see prayer for the dead not as hopeful gestures cast into an uncertain void, but as precision instruments capable of delivering grace to souls who needed it at the exact moment they were ready to receive it. This understanding filled him with both awe and responsibility. Every prayer mattered, because every prayer had the potential to be the decisive intervention in a soul's eternal destiny. The experience also revealed something extraordinary about maternal love specifically. The soldier's mother hadn't prayed with theological sophistication or elaborate ritual. She had simply opened her heart and poured out her love for her lost child. Yet this simple expression of maternal devotion carried enough spiritual power to shatter years of spiritual bondage. Padre Pio concluded that certain forms of love possess inherent spiritual authority that operates independently of religious knowledge or formal training. He began teaching that the prayers of parents for their children, whether living or dead, carry special weight in the spiritual realm. A mother's love mirrors divine love in its unconditional nature, its willingness to sacrifice, its refusal to abandon hope, even in impossible circumstances. When such love is directed toward heaven on behalf of a child's soul, it moves through spiritual dimensions with unique force and clarity. This insight led Padre Pio to encourage bereaved parents in ways that surprised many who heard him. Instead of offering conventional consolation about God's mysterious will, he would tell them that their continued love for their deceased children was actually a form of ongoing ministry. Their prayers weren't just expressions of grief or hope. They were active spiritual work that could influence their children's eternal welfare. One father, who had lost his teenage son in a drowning accident, came to Padre Pio months after the tragedy, consumed with guilt over their last conversation, which had ended in anger. Padre Pio listened as the man described his torment over words that could never be taken back, forgiveness that could never be asked for, love that had never been properly expressed. "Your son knows now what was truly in your heart," Padre Pio told him gently, "but he may still carry the wound of that final argument. Pray specifically for his healing from that memory. Ask God to let your love reach him where your words cannot. Love has a voice that speaks louder than any harsh words ever spoken in life." The father followed this guidance, dedicating himself to daily prayer for his son's spiritual healing. Weeks later, he returned to report an extraordinary experience. During his nightly prayers, he had suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of peace, accompanied by what he could only describe as his son's presence. Not a vision or apparition, but an unmistakable spiritual closeness that carried the clear message of forgiveness and continued love. These testimonies accumulated around Padre Pio, like evidence of an invisible world operating parallel to the one we see. Each story confirmed what he had learned that February night. Prayer creates bridges across dimensions that seem impossible to cross. Love establishes connections that death cannot sever. The spiritual realm responds to authentic human emotion with immediacy and precision that defies earthly understanding. But Padre Pio also discovered that not all prayers for the dead carry equal power. The most effective intercessions came from hearts that had been purified through suffering, sacrifice, and genuine spiritual maturity. A widow who had learned to forgive her husband's failings before his death could pray for his soul with clarity that reached him directly. Parents who had maintained unconditional love for wayward children could intercede for them with authority that heaven recognized instantly. This led him to teach that preparing to pray effectively for others required ongoing work on one's own spiritual condition. Pride, resentment, unforgiveness, and spiritual coldness created barriers that weakened prayer's effectiveness. But hearts that had been softened through genuine conversion became conduits through which divine mercy could flow with remarkable force. The soldier's story also revealed that souls in purgatory maintain awareness of earthly prayers offered on their behalf. They don't experience these prayers as distant echoes, but as immediate spiritual realities that change their condition instantly. This meant that every rosary, every mass, every moment of loving remembrance was felt by the intended recipient as tangible assistance in their journey toward eternal peace. Padre Pio began describing purgatory not as a place of punishment, but as a state of intense spiritual therapy, where souls learn to receive the full force of divine love without being overwhelmed by it. The prayers of the living don't change God's disposition toward these souls. Instead, they provide the spiritual strength needed for the souls themselves to complete their transformation into beings capable of eternal union with perfect love. This understanding revolutionized his approach to spiritual direction. When people asked him to pray for their deceased relatives, he would often ask detailed questions about the person's life, their struggles, their unhealed wounds, their unfulfilled longings. Then he would craft prayers that addressed these specific spiritual needs with surgical precision. For a man who had died bitter over professional failures, Padre Pio might pray for release from pride and acceptance of divine providence. For a woman who had struggled with depression, he might intercede for healing from despair and infusion of supernatural hope. These targeted prayers, informed by intimate knowledge of the soul's earthly journey, seemed to accelerate the purification process dramatically. This single encounter changed everything Padre Pio believed about the power of prayer for the dead. He witnessed divine mercy operating at the speed of love itself, proving that no soul is ever beyond reach, and no prayer is ever wasted. The next time you remember someone who has passed away, know that your love can still reach them. Your prayer might be the very key that unlocks their journey to eternal peace. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to know that love truly never dies.